We're session that we're going to talk about eligible expenditures for impact fees. My name is Dwayne Guthrie. I'm the impact fee manager with Manatee County. It's kind of a new role for me. I've been there since roughly January, I think, is when I started. Before that, for 20 or 30 years or so, I was an impact fee consultant with Tischler Bice, so I've done a lot of studies all across the United States, worked with Tyson and Jim and all those guys that were in that morning session. So it's a little different world for me to be really down dirty in all the details, and so that's part of the things that we want to talk about during this session. And so we have a little bit change of our lineup this morning. The guy from Atlanta had to cancel, so fortunately I have nice people that volunteer to step up and help me out. So we have Lucy Gallo who's going to fill in, and also Jason, who was in the last session. They're both going to cover eligible expenditures. Lucy's perspective is she's going to talk about some things that are going on in Arizona, where we actually have private consultants now auditing fees. So she'll give you some background on that. I'm going to then turn it over to Charles Wu. Charles is a planner, an architect. He's been now with the city of Coral Gables. He's worked extensively in Florida, West Palm Beach Gardens, I think it was the other place. And now he's the assistant director of development services or something like that in the city of Coral Gables. Charles and I also worked together on the update of their fees back when I was a consultant. So that's how he got roped into doing this. So I appreciate you being here, Charles. And then Jason, if you were in the last session, you heard Jason's with Sarasota County. He's part of the Impact Fee Administration group there. So that's our backgrounds. We're going to set a timer. We're going to try to do 15 minutes each and leave 15 minutes for questions at the end. So I'm going to be a little rude here and start it, and Lucy's going to do her thing.
Good morning. Bear with me. I found out yesterday I was going to be on the panel, so I'll go quickly and I'll go first. Our firm represents both the public and the private sector on our fiscal and economic work, but as far as development impact fees, we primarily represent the private sector, whether we're reviewing fees or challenging the fee or perhaps auditing the fee. So I do have a bit of a different perspective than maybe other practitioners in the room. I guess our observations when we are involved in an expenditure challenge is there's this big disconnect. You know, so much work on the front end occurs working the local government and their impact fee consultant. Everything is airtight. You know, a tremendous amount of work goes in on the front end to make sure that the ordinance and the fee are legally defensible. Then in implementation, we see that there are certain requirements that need to be followed, whether it's ordinances or state law, and of course there's always the court of public opinion. But I think where there always are opportunities for best practice and safeguards in preventing this disconnect between having an airtight bulletproof impact fee on the front end and then have errors, irregularities, misunderstandings occur in the expenditure side. It really happens more often than you think it does, even with people that are in their positions that are very conscientious that just may not know. So I think like it's a no-brainer that, you know, the more transparent the processes and reporting are, the better. Adequate documentation, as in any accounting system, needs to be done at that point in time, not 5 or 10 years down the road when perhaps there's a challenge, because it's very difficult to go back and reconstruct level of service data or whatever else you need to do after the fact, and you wouldn't want to. I think regular staff training, just in terms of the nuances of impact fee statutory obligations, and not to mention this very complicated nature that even at the federal courts haven't quite figured out in terms of what's eligible and what's not. You know, we think it's difficult as practitioners when you're at the staff level and you're more in the trenches with processing transactions and may not quite understand all those nuances. It still becomes very difficult and challenging and complex, and folks need to know at every level. And in some jurisdiction, there are internal and external audits of trust fund activity, and I think if your local government has that process in place, that's probably, one of the best things that could happen to make sure that your trust fund activity records are getting a third-party review on a regular basis. It's a really good insurance policy. As Dwayne mentioned, some states even require auditing on a regular basis, Arizona being one of those, and audit every 2 years. And our practice in Phoenix performs a good many of those audits. And I did want to point out to you all, the Florida Impact Fee Act does require regular reporting, or does require reporting. You would think that that would be a requirement in every state. It's not necessarily. But again, if we're talking good practices, the fact that the trust fund activity should be kept separated by type of fee, that's a no-brainer, but in practice that's not always the case. And there can be a lot of problems with shifting funds between and betwixt the different types of fees, which obviously is improper. One area in our review of fees that we find lots of exception in is the requirement of the Florida Impact Fee Act regarding this affidavit that must accompany the audited financial statements, typically the CAFR of the local government. So this might be something that's easily overlooked, and when you get back to your offices, you may just want to make sure that that's part of your annual checklist and reporting that occurs. I think everybody in all cases, for all stakeholders, whether you're the public or private side, you really want your community to avoid being in the headlines because of impact fee issues, whether it be from irregularities, embezzlement, mismanagement, a violation of a spending limit violation, that funds weren't expended within the time frame, so a refund would be required, or just a misinterpretation of what the funds could legally be spent for. You would think that the spending limitation would be a kind of a easy check the box for most jurisdictions. But within the past year, we were meeting with one of the state's largest school systems, and the staff and their attorney were unaware that school district had a spending period within their impact fee. So, things just slip up. I think it's very easy when in this practice that you can kind of get focused in on what you think are the problem areas and forget about that there are other problem areas that are looming. But I think any jurisdiction.
I still can't hear you, Greg.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Sorry about that. So, any jurisdiction that is continuing to see an increase in their trust fund balance over time, that's the big warning signal. And not that there's necessarily anything that is happening that could put you at risk for a refund, but it's definitely, that's the first warning sign if you're not spending the monies on a timely basis. I'm just going to run through a couple of examples. I think in all the sessions we've attended to date, there's been a number of examples of what are eligible and ineligible, as part of how the fee study is written, as well as how the funds are spent in general. In this particular case, and you'll see this in the slides for the handout after the presentation, but there was a fairly restrictive limitations on what the fees could be spent for in terms of water funds, and they were spent on improvements other than what they were supposed to be spent on. So I think this is just an example of probably a training opportunity, that it appears to be, well documented what, from both the study and the act, what the limitations on the fund were to be able to, what was authorized to spend, and whether or not there was some justification or some case to be made that the funds were actually spent on another type of improvement. Again, that needs to be documented at that point in time versus trying to justify it after the fact. Not that you can't overcome that hurdle, but you don't want to have to justify that during the audit process. Similar situation on the wastewater side. The fees were spent on improvements other than what were authorized in the study in the Act. In this particular finding, the funds were spent on a fire station that was actually, as part of the documented study, would have been curing a deficiency, which was not allowed. And I guess the unfortunate thing in this particular case was that those funds could have been eligibly spent on other fire stations for which were included in the study. So again, kind of an opportunity that it was somebody stubbed their toe when they didn't need to, because there was a proper use of the fees, that it was just allocated to the wrong fee. I think this is another example, and I'm not sure how many folks were in the panel upstairs talking about impact fee methodologies, but that just care must be taken when you're using debt service paying debt service with impact fees, that you make sure that there's an allocation process, that amount of debt service is directly associated with the impacts of new development. And again, that's a careful calculation that can put the entire payment at risk if you're not carefully documenting what portion is attributable to growth. In this particular case, there's a number of areas or fees that include administrative costs. So when you're talking about designing processes that provide transparency and provide a clear trail, don't overlook that the administrative cost area or any sort of labor allocation. It's important of identifying those costs, particularly if you have programs that allow cost associated with developing a capital improvement plan to be part of your impact fee, an eligible impact fee expenditure. Those require as much care and allocation in terms of fee eligibility as any sort of hard cost. So care must be taken in that area. In this particular example, we have park and administrative costs. Speaking of development of a master plan that was paid for with impact fee monies, when in reality although some state statutes would allow that particular cost, in this state it was not allowable, and it's putting $1.5 million at risk for having to be refunded back to that particular impact fee program. So and I think it's in terms of the other presentations we've heard, select your costs carefully. There is probably a whole host of, there's always a longer list of projects to be funded than can be funded with impact fees. So, be really careful in choosing wisely which are the ones that are just absolutely no-brainers that have been associated as growth-related projects. The timing may be tricky because, there may be factors that you would need to go ahead and start spending your impact fee money. So a study, maybe those early costs that would be natural to be spent as part of the process, you would just need to make sure that as part of your particular program that's an eligible cost. So
we can go ahead and do a couple quick questions if you have them for Lucy, and then we'll do more at the end. So anything specific to the things she talked about? So one of the slides you might have saw this morning when Tyson was doing his legal overview was that trust but verify slide. Well, that was one of the principles in Lucy's firm, where talking about Colorado jurisdiction. So really having consultants routinely audit impact fees is more of a Western thing, but I got a feeling it's coming east. And Florida has a very short enabling legislation, a one-pager. It's very atypical. Most of the states, they're 15, 20 pages, a lot more detail. I think Arizona went crazy. Like they tried to make so many hoops to jump through that maybe nobody would do it, but everybody pretty much is doing it. Some jurisdictions bailed, but a lot of them basically didn't have a lot of revenue sources and decided to go through the whole update process and comply. So in some ways, Florida is easier to have fees here because we don't have all that very specific state legislation to deal with. But I think there's still best practices that we can learn from those places, like having capital improvement programs and trying to be a little more upfront about the expenditures that you plan to make with the capital improvement dollars. I know from my perspective as a consultant, a lot of times I would go back 5 years later or some period like that to do an update, and there would be horror stories where I talk to staff and find out they're spending their dollars on debt service where that wasn't the methodology. So how the calculations are done is really kind of a guideline on what you should be doing. And a lot of it just happens because the project manager is not the finance person, is not the planning CIP people. And so there's just kind of this disconnect because everybody's got their little roles and they're not really talking about that this is a special kind of revenue, has lots of strings attached, and we just can't treat it like a general revenue like we do a lot of our other things. So with that, I think we'll go over to Charles. He's going to talk about Coral Gables. And we just got to get his slides there. Go.
Good morning. First, I'd like to introduce the history of impact fees. For the record, I'm Charles Wu, the Assistant Development Services Director for Coral Gables, Florida. And first, I'd like to introduce the history of our impact fees. It's been 10 years we've been doing impact fees, and we just had a recent update done by Tish Labais. And give you some case studies of 4 items. The underlying project, a mobility fee that which you talked about earlier sessions, special institutions, University of Miami, and how we convince them to embrace impact fees for the city of Coral Gables. And last, the first time I believe in Florida to institute park impact fees for non-residential projects. I believe it's the first time we're doing it in Florida, so stay tuned. Coral Gables was incorporated in 1925. It's located between Miami and West Miami. We are about 1 mile south of the International Airport. We're a little less than 13 square miles. Population is about 50,000, so we're not a large city. And we built out. We only have 3% vacant land left. So whatever impact fees we'll be generating will be from redevelopment in the city. So that's a key point. We don't have a lot of impact fees to look forward to other than redevelopment. We are fairly exclusive in terms of our average housing value is $881,000 per average household. Housing value, average household income is $151,000. Taxable value is $14.4 billion of property. We have about 11 million square feet of office and 3.5 million retail. We also the home of University of Miami. Because of our location, we have 150 multinational corporations and about 20 multinational offices. And we have the rare distinction of being one of the 3 cities in Florida with 3 AAA ratings in Florida. And the history of our impact fee, we initially adopted in 2007. So far we've collected, and again, because we are redevelopment scenario, collected 7.28 impact fees for the entire city. And because of our small city, the entire city is the service area, as opposed to a county where you carve out the service area. Originally, we are collecting 4, which is a government, which we now call municipal, police, fire, and parks. And just an FYI, we also have a sanitary sewer capacity fee and a arts and public places fee. That mirrors the county. Miami-Dade County has a 1.5% art and public places fee for public buildings. In addition to that, we instituted a 1% public art for private projects. So that's on top of that. We collected $2.89 million on public art funds so far, as an FYI. And this is very important down the line because we try to create synergy with our fees we collected down the line. So as I go along, you'll see how these funds come together and create projects. 2 years later, we adopted Impact Fees University of Miami, and I have a total separate slides for that. Fire impact fee, of course, will be used for a new fire station. Police and general government, now we call municipal fees, will be for a new public safety facility, which should also house IT, HR, and the parking department, and that's why municipal fees will be going towards that. And of course, parking impact fee will be used for purchasing of vacant land throughout the city for passive parks. And now an update. As recent as this year, we updated our impact fees again done by Tish Labais. And we instituted a new mobility impact fee, and I'll get into that in separate slides. And we are now instituting non-residential projects for park impact fees, and I have separate slides for that. In addition to that, we update our service fee, so we're more sustainable. After 5 years, we have enough money to do our impact fee update study. And as you heard earlier, if you were here in the earlier sessions, residential use is now based on square footage. It used to be a residential type, now we use residential square footage. And that is partially to address the McMansion issue we have encountered. We have a lot of land valued properties that the structures are underutilized. So we're seeing some tear downs throughout the years and building huge projects, which are creating some angst in the neighborhood, I have to say. So that's a totally separate planning issue. But it's also to capture the McMansion expansions. And we also have some very exclusive condos that even though they're 3 bedrooms, they're coming up with 5,000 square feet. Apparently there's a market for that in Coral Gables. So these are condos, very exclusive, private elevators, 2 units per floor, some of them 1 unit per floor. And we're seeing that in that market as well. We are a small city. Sometimes we have between 100 and 248 new residential units coming online. All depends on the market. And one thing we learned is to simplify our commercial categories. Tish Labais recommended from our 23 different types of commercial uses to 4. And I think that's going to help a long way. We updated University of Miami to mirror most of our citywide impact fees, and we updated our sewer capacity fee. And one thing unique that the commission thought was important is to encourage small expansions, is to exempt any expansions less than 1,000 square feet. One of the 4 takeaways I'd like to share with you is the underline. What is the underline? It is a project-specific targeted, and this is the mission statement, to develop the area below Miami Metro Rail, which starts from Miami River down the way to the Mall, into a neighborhood park, urban trail, and canvas for artistic expressions to create a safer, healthier, more connected, mobile, and engaged community. There are several key emphases for public safety, connectivity. This is a 10-mile run covering about 7 Metro Rail stations. In between, they have about 100,000 residents, about 24 public and private schools, 3 major hospitals, 3 major malls, and of course, as you know, along transit route, for those planners you know, they're ripe for transit-oriented development, which is much more intensity with very few parking spaces. Actually, Miami waives parking for TD, transit-oriented development within the city of Miami. So there are a lot of possible impact fees that can be targeted within this corridor. And the reason why I want to bring this up is subject for discussion for the city of Coral Gables in the very near future. The firm called James Corner Field Operation New York City was selected to design this. Apparently the design has been selected, completed, and they plan to break ground next year. A non-for-profit entity called Friends of the Underline, which is the source of these slides, is a non-for-profit agency, is set up to raise funds and to maintain this 10-mile stretch. It's a 100-foot right-of-way under the Metro line. It's a partnership between the county, state, FDOT, the MPO, which is now called Transportation Planning Organization, Coral Gables, South Miami, and University of Miami. So it's quite comprehensive. And these are some images, what they've come together. To your left, pretty much more of the active recreation uses. In the middle is more of the passive, and to the right is more of the bike tracks and something in between. So it's meant to be all-encompassing to cover multimodal, which will play into our mobility impact fees down the line. And they're comparing this similar to the Atlanta Beltline project, Chicago 606, Indianapolis Cultural Trail. The underline is 10 miles. They project 10 million per mile. For the 10 mile, they estimate $100 million. That is the grand vision. And according to friends of the underline, 60 million has been committed. They have sought a grant from Florida, 11 million. And as recent as last year, the city of Miami adopted a resolution to support this project to dedicate any projects derived parking impact fees within 1,000 feet of the underline to this project. So there's quite a commitment. And this is a windfall for them because, as I said, along the metro line, you have train stations. Developers are taking advantage of that to build some really intense projects. So there'll be some impact fees derived from that. And mirroring the county, the Friends of Underline, it will be suggesting in the very near future for the city to consider a similar resolution that we dedicate within 1,000 feet of the underline impact fees within the city of Coral Gables project, parking impact fees towards this project. So that's under consideration. And how does it relate to City of Coral Gables? In red is where the three phases of how the 10 mile, about less than 3 miles, is within Coral Gables. Phase 5, if you can see, is a project itself. They dedicate to build their section on their own as part of their project approval. So it seems that that is committed. And we have 2 phases, phase 6 and phase 7. Phase 7 is primarily within the University of Miami. And they have some concerns because under the metro rail is primarily parking used for them. So they're concerned about losing the parking spaces. But we still like to pursue a partnership with the University of Miami and the Friends of the Underline. So far, 20% is committed, which is, again, phase 5 within the red area. And the 25% we probably can get from a built-out phase of impact fees. So we still have a shortfall about 45% to 50%. We all know parking impact fees is not going to be the sole source of projects like these, so it's going to be an intense fundraising project to implement this. This is a more detailed look. To the top is the Gables Station, which I said is a project that is very intense, and they propose to build their section of the underline that fronts there. And we have UM student housing. They will not pay any impact fee because they are past credits. But some of the adjacent projects will have some impact fees that can be dedicated towards that. So it's a policy decision the commission will have to make down the line. And we did a rough built-out scenario within 1,000 feet of the underline. And based on the built-out scenario of vacant land, which could be 20, 30 years down the road, we can expect to come in with 6 million. And for the committed projects, we can expect to have 2.7 million. So we still have a shortfall of 16 million to help Friends of the Underline to build this project within the city of Coral Gables city limits. So it's a long-term effort. Moving forward on mobility fee, as you know, a typical road impact fee is used to build new roads or expand existing ones. And in Miami-Dade does collect the road impact fees. For a city of Coral Gables, which is built out and very urban, it's not practical for us to take advantage of that resource. What we've been doing, which you've heard in other sessions, is to use mobility fee to address some of the mobility infrastructure, such as to move pedestrians, transit users, bicyclists, and not only vehicles. As you know, heard earlier, Alachua County did it. Jacksonville, Hillsborough, and Osceola. So Coral Gables just started approving this. And what you see is an image of Salcedo, where you can use a mobility impact fee to do a racetrack on this residential street. As you can see here, the racetrack is on the right, a separated median, and the road is narrowed to 2 lanes here. That's an example of what we'd like to see down the line. Other uses for mobility impact fee will be the planning and funding of a multimodal transportation plan, a bicycle master plan, trolley purchases, sidewalk extensions, traffic calming, and streetscape. And here I wanted to show you the image of an ICOC sculpture located in the city. We used the park impact fee for this traffic circle enhancement. It was very controversial. There was an effort for some residents to recall this, and that effort failed. But it did get finally instituted, and it's quite well received. We did have an event here from Art Basel, so we're getting a reputation of having a little bit out-of-the-box artwork in public art in Coral Gables. But my point is, here you can use the mobility fee for traffic calming, for traffic circle, and the public art fee to make a project like this work. And to the bottom left is a new project we just finished partially called Giralda. 100 block Giralda in downtown Coral Gables was pretty much a restaurant row. We petitioned the county to close it to become a residential plaza. And now the plaza is complete. We are going to dedicate about 10% of the project towards the streetscape projects like this. It was a $21 million project for Miracle Mile and Giralda, of which the city will be chipping in 50%, and the Business Improvement District, will be chipping in 50%. So we'll be dedicating 50% of the city, and some of that can be used from mobility fee. So I'll just cover University of Miami real quick. I'm not going to go through the history real quick. But what I wanted to say is that they have significant development plans. They are tearing down a lot of older structures, and they'll be building a lot more new structures. For instance, recently they built a new nursing training facility, which are using dummies to practice on. This Lunar Medical Center is a 200,000 square foot outpatient facility. It's quite huge. And it's scheduled to build another 1,000 bed dormitory. So they're a large player in the city of Coral Gables. And hence, a long time ago, when we instituted impact fees, we partnered with them to share data, and they agreed to actually fund their portion of the impact fee study. So we became partners. We updated it. For the most part, they agreed with the update. They will mirror the fire, municipal, and mobility impact fees. They'll be charged no park impact fee because it's quite a campus and they have a lot of greenery. But they'll be charged 30% of the police impact fees for academic uses and 94 police impact fees for students. They do have their separate campus police. So far, they're not paying anything because there are substantial demolitions in the past. So the lessons learned is to partner with these special institutions up front. Hopefully, they can share data, understand the benefits of having an impact fee that covers them as well. And last but not least, park impact fee in non-residential projects. Coral Gables has experienced significant redevelopment in our corridors, particularly US 1, North Ponce, and our downtown. Our population easily doubles in the daytime, and we got data for non-residential uses of park facilities as well as business uses for sport leagues. And we estimate non-residents constitute 25% of our park use time. And as a result, the cost allocation of residential for park impact fees is 80% residential, 12% non-residential. Because we believe we found a rational nexus that office workers and retail users do need to use park and open space. But the lessons learned is that a challenge remains to find vacant land. In downtown in particular, land is very valuable. So we know the parking impact fee will not be able to cover that. So we're looking at several avenues to maybe increase the minimum space requirement, open space requirement for downtown projects, and maybe an open space, a TDR, transfer development rights option. This is the Gables Station project along the first phase within Coral Gables of the underline. As you can see, the northern half. The upper half is the underlying plan, and they'll be developing their portion. And Gable Station itself has significant open space themselves. And this is why I can tell you a project coming in can interface and do their portion of the project while they're even paying their own impact fees, and they're providing open space as well. And the last project is to be seen, they'll be breaking ground this year, is called the Plaza. This is a 4-city block south of downtown. It's estimated $400 million project. There is a historic building in the middle. Part of the commitment, they will be restoring the historic building. It's about 137,000 square foot retail, about 136 apartment units, 220 rooms. But as part of the development agreement, which the developer agreed to, is to contribute $2.7 million for public art and public safety, $2 million to the park, which is adjacent on the lower left corner there. The public park called the Ponce Circle Park, $2.5 million for 4 additional trolleys, and restore the structure and do a significant streetscape project within the surrounding communities. So I just want to highlight this major project coming in the city of Coral Gables and how we took advantage of their contributions, part of the development agreement, and their contribution to the impact fee ordinance as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Any questions for Charles?
I'm not familiar with mobility fees. Are those, so the bike path, for instance, is that where bike paths aren't adjacent to the roadway?
We have a combination, depends on the specific bike master plan. Some of them we plan to have it, some of them can be shared. Ideally is to have them separated. And as we roll them out, we also need to get neighborhood buy-in because some neighborhoods may want it, some neighborhoods do not.
So traditionally, when they've been included with the roadway, have you had it in your roadway impact fee, or was that a piece that had?
We do not have a roadway impact fees.
Oh, okay.
That's the county.
The new fee they just adopted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the road impact fee is a county fee.
It's a little different in Miami-Dade. The county takes care of the major like arterial network, and so they have a layer of their own fees. So the cities are basically stepping down to more like the collectors and that kind of thing. And so there's actually kind of a layer cake kind of a thing in Miami.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I see from your presentation that you introduced impact fee for the UN campus in 2009, right? But impact fee in your city was enacted before that, right?
It was first adopted in 2009, and we just updated it in 2017.
No, but the impact fee in general, when it was implemented in Coral Gables?
2007.
Yeah, there was a time lag to work out the details with Coral Gables. I mean, the University of
UN,
Miami.
right?
Yeah.
So at the time, like between 2007 and 2009, there was no impact fee. You didn't charge any
Correct.
impact fee to UN.
Right.
Oh,
And they have not paid any so far. As I told you, they paid demolishing structures, but they have a very aggressive redevelopment project to modernize their programs and bring in more modern student dorms. And down the line, they want to do a convention center. A convention will not be any of the academic uses. There will be a general citywide impact fee use calculations. Thank you.